Satan. Prologue, Whispers from the Cradle. I am Niko Kuri, born on March 3, 1976, in the heart of Tirana, Albania, under the iron grip of what they called the People's Socialist Republic, a name that masked the raw brutality of communism like a thin veil over a festering wound. But as a child, I knew none of this. The world was not yet divided into oppressors and the oppressed, into the living and the spectral echoes that would later haunt my every step. I was simply a boy, emerging from the fog of infancy into a reality shaped by shadows, silence, and the unyielding walls of a home that felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. My earliest memories are fragments, like shattered glass reflecting distorted glimpses of a life just beginning to take form. They start not with the clamor of the streets or the warmth of familial arms, but with isolation, profound, echoing isolation. I was often left alone in our apartment, the doors bolted shut, the windows sealed against the outside world as if to ward off some invisible menace. The building itself was a relic of power, known as the Executive Committee, a squat, imposing structure in the dead center of Tirana, where the pulse of the capital throbbed just beyond its thick stone walls. It had once housed the machinations of the regime, the whispered decrees and the iron-fisted decisions that governed our lives. Now, it sheltered families like mine, ordinary souls caught in the web of a system that devoured its own. The apartment was small, oppressively so, with walls painted in a faded beige that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of damp plaster and the faint, metallic tang of rust from the old pipes that groaned like distant thunder in the night. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the heavy curtains. Curtains my mother had sewn from scraps of fabric, their patterns worn and threadbare, evoking a sense of makeshift endurance. I remember pressing my tiny palms against the cool glass of the window, peering out at the world below, but the view was always obscured, the panes fogged by my breath or dirted by the perpetual haze of the city. Emotions in those early days were raw, unfiltered. A child's pure, unadulterated wonder mixed with a creeping fear that I couldn't yet name. Loneliness wrapped around me like a cold blanket, tightening with each hour that ticked by on the old clock in the corner, its hands moving with agonizing slowness. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the only sound sometimes, besides the muffled echoes from the hallway outside. Footsteps of neighbors hurrying past, their voices hushed as if afraid the walls themselves might listen and report back to the authorities. I felt small, insignificant, like a speck in a vast, indifferent universe. Why was I alone? Where were my parents? These questions bubbled up in my mind, not as words. I was too young for that, but as a gnawing ache in my chest, a flutter of anxiety that made my heart race. The room itself became my entire world, every detail etched into my memory with the intensity of a mind grasping for meaning. The floor was wooden, splintered in places where the varnish had peeled away, revealing the rough grain beneath. I would crawl across it, my knees scraping against the uneven planks, tracing the patterns with my fingers, the swirls and knots like secret maps to hidden treasures. There was a single bed in the corner, its mattress sagging under the weight of faded blankets, embroidered with motifs of Albanian eagles that my grandmother had told stories about, symbols of freedom in a land where freedom was a forbidden word. Beside it, a small table held a few toys. A wooden truck, its paint chipped from endless rolling across the floor, and a rag doll with button eyes that stared back at me with unblinking judgment. Outside, through those sealed windows, Tirana sprawled in a gray expanse. Skanderbeg Square lay just beyond, though I didn't know its name then, a vast open space where people gathered like ants, their coats bundled against the chill winds that swept down from the Dachti Mountains. The air carried hints of coal smoke from the factories on the outskirts, mingling with the aroma of bread baking in communal ovens. But inside, it was stillness. I recall one afternoon, the light slanting in golden shafts through a tear in the curtain, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. I reached out to catch them, my chubby fingers closing on nothing, and in that moment, a spark of curiosity ignited. My first brush with the intangible, the unseen forces that would later define my existence. My parents, My mother, a seamstress with calloused hands and weary eyes, and my father, a laborer in one of the state factories, were often gone, swallowed by the demands of the regime. Work was not a choice. It was survival. They would leave before dawn, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my soul, and return only as the sun dipped below the horizon. In those solitary hours, I learned to entertain myself, building forts from cushions or whispering stories to the shadows in the corners. But the emotions deepened with each passing day. A budding resentment toward the absence, a fear that they might not return, and beneath it all, a quiet resilience forming like a shield around my heart. This building, this prison of stone and secrets, stood until I was 3.5. Then, one day, we were uprooted, moved to another place as the regime decided our home was no longer fit, or perhaps it interfered with their grand visions. Years later, I would learn of its fate. Demolished in a controlled explosion, the structure crumbling in a cloud of dust and debris, captured in a fleeting YouTube clip that showed the blast ripping through its foundations. In its place rose the National History Museum, a monument to the nation's curated past, erasing the old to build the new. But for me, as a child, it was just the end of one chapter of isolation, the beginning of discoveries that would unravel the fabric of reality itself. Little did I know, in those quiet, locked rooms, that the seeds of something extraordinary were taking root. The supernatural, or what humans call supernatural, was already whispering to me through the ether, frequencies of the mind connecting in ways science had yet to fully grasp. Ghosts, magicians, the remote viewing experiments of the CIA's Stargate project. They were all threads in a tapestry I would weave to survive the horrors ahead. But back then, I was innocent, unknowing, a blank slate in a world ruled by Satan incarnate. The communism that poisoned hearts and minds, turning brothers against brothers. As I grew, the veils would lift, revealing the atrocities, the persecutions of my family, the cover-ups that disguised dictatorship as democracy, the murders of the innocent who dared stand with me. I would dive into the depths of the paranormal, not as myth, but as science. The psychological singularity fraction, born from brain waves linking humans in a 50-meter radius, forming entities smarter than any one mind, networking globally into what fools call God or the devil. I mastered it, bent it to my will, foreseeing futures and neutralizing enemies to claw my way from certain death. This is my story, a descent into the abyss and a climb toward truth. It begins in silence, in a locked room, with a child who knew nothing, yet